when they started production on the other shows. Unreal Monsters, in my opinion, wasn't a bad show. I never really saw it as a Ren and Stimpy ripoff. Like, Rocko's Modern Life, I can understand more people calling that a Ren and Stimpy ripoff than Unreal Monsters. But, good show, really. I never really had a problem with it.
Yeah, and to think that it'll be celebrating its 20th anniversary this October.
Well, that's really cool. I wonder if... I doubt Nick will say anything about it, but maybe something will happen on Teen Nick or 90s or all that, and they'll celebrate it.
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
it'd be nice.
Yeah, it'd be nice. Our Real Monsters, the complete series, is released all on DVD thanks to Shout Factory, so that'll be a great opportunity to pick it up.
Yeah, that's cool, too. At least, Shout Factory has had some pretty mixed reviews on some things, but it's nice to see them do that for the show. Again, it is a show that I believe doesn't really get a lot of the credit it deserves. I thought it was fine. One of the first, Nicktoons, a fine Nicktoon, and, a good classic Class Teacher Poe Nicktoon. I wish it would have lasted longer. Good show.
Yeah. Alright, now we can get to the final show that came out in '94, which is All That. I just gotta say, after talking about Roundhouse, it just makes me appreciate that All That came out because this was the show that defined the 90s for Nickelodeon.
It really did. The the sketches were, not all of the sketches were great, but a lot of them, like especially the reoccurring ones, are ones that even if you don't find them, funny now, you remember them. You have, a fond memory of them. Like, what was it? Dairy Boy, Super Dairy Boy was one. Repairman, Man. Dear Ashley, I believe.
Yes.
Just off the top of my head, that's a couple that, even if you don't find them funny anymore, you still have a very fond memory of, when you did, when you laughed at them, when they were always airing vital information for everyday life. That's another one.
Yeah, Good Burger's another one. There's Okra. There's The Island Girls.
Coach Krieger.
Yep, Coach Krieger, Randy and Mandy, French Words with Pierre Escargot.
All That was a show, really, that I thought was good for the first few seasons, but as the cast members started to leave, Keenan and Kel went on to do their own show, Amanda's show went on to do her own show, and talk about those later, but as the cast started to get older and started to leave, the new cast members started to come in, and unfortunately it did start to kind of lose that magic that it had in the first few seasons with the new cast members. I mean, they were trying, but as it started to get closer to the 2000s, All That was kind of petering out of notoriety and staying power.
If I had anything to say, I think All That was brilliant for its first few seasons, but I think it went downhill as it went on. And strangely enough, like the Fairly Odd Parents, even though it declined before it came back, in many people's opinions, it came back. But the reboot era is considered worse than the decline.
Well, here's the thing. You see, around seasons 5 through 6, we already saw that things were starting to change. Keenan and Kel were starting to go off into their own show. Amanda was starting to go into her own show. And Dan Schneider, who was the main producer and the man pretty much behind All That, he left off and he was working as a producer and creator for those two shows that we just previously mentioned. And then we had other people trying to hold it up, like Kevin Coppola was an executive producer at that point, alongside with Heath Seibert. But and not to mention that a lot of the cast members left because they were getting too old or their contracts were running out. And
wanted to pursue other opportunities and such.
That is true. They also pursued other opportunities. And
when did Jamie Lynn Spears become a cast member? Was that before the reboot or after?
It was after the reboot. It was after the revival.
Okay, so she was in the reboot.
Yeah, which we will not be discussing about until we've reached the 2000s, which is the next part.
Okay.
So yeah, but right now we're focusing on seasons 1 through 6. So, season 5 and 6, at that point, it was just getting tired. The people who grew up with the original 90s Nickelodeon were already growing older. They were deviating away from Nickelodeon and going into other channels, particularly MTV.
Yeah, after, season 5 and 6, All That's humor was starting to grow tiresome and stale, and it's a shame, but it was. I mean, there's only so much that you can really do with something that's like sketch comedy, and there's only so many times you can really do a sketch over and still have it seem like fresh and popular, and really all that suffered that sort of fate when you think about it. Really fell off after really season 4. Like as I said earlier, the cast members started to leave, and the cast members they got as replacements didn't really have the. I don't want to say that they weren't funny, but the problem is that the cast members that the kids were watching for years left, and they didn't really have a connection with the new cast members, and in turn, the show started to drop off for that reason too.
Josh Server was the last person who was one of the original cast members from the earlier seasons of all that, and he was interacting with these new younger kids, and to be quite honest, it looked kind of awkward.
And you can see why. I mean, the kids, started to grow up and started to age, and, when they start to bring in new kids, it did sort of seem a bit awkward, especially considering the chemistry that Josh had with the original cast was gone. I mean, these were new kids. He didn't have that chemistry that he had with the other cast members that he'd been doing for quite a few years up to this point.
Exactly. And, there were a lot of people who were brought into all that they had a lot of potential, but it wasn't there yet. Like, one of my favorite underrated cast members was Gabriel Iglesias.
Yeah, definitely. He didn't come into his own just yet, but as we know Gabriel Iglesias now, he's pretty big in the comedy scene.
Yeah, he's like one of the best stand-ups out there. If you ever see him on Comedy Central, like, I went to see him live when he arrived in Hollywood, and he was amazing. Everybody everyone just laughed so loud on his stories and his jokes.
Wasn't Gabriel in, like, the last season before the reboot?
Yes, he was in the last season before the reboot. And other people who were around the last seasons were Mark Saul and Nick Cannon. And, those were, like, some of the people who were in the last seasons, Leon Frierson. But the thing is that, due to many of the major cast members that we all came to know left, and, a lot of the pivotal characters that they left alongside with them, and it just felt tired at that point, and,
there was really no foundation for the new characters to come in for. There was really no veteran leadership. It was kind of, Josh Server was still there, but I don't know if you could really call him somebody who could hold the glue together. As said, a lot of new cast members, a lot of unfamiliarity from the people watching, because there's a lot of new people that they don't know, and they don't know the skits that they would play, they don't know how funny they would be, and when you don't know, sometimes you don't want to know.
Exactly. You don't want to know at all. And at that point, people were not really caring as much. Around 94, we had MTV, Comedy Central was becoming a big thing back then. 94, this was like when Beavis and Butthead was at its prime, The Simpsons were at its prime, and also South Park came out around that same time in the late 90s, so...
Yeah, this was a time where you kind of had to step up your game in terms of comedy.
Exactly, and
Nickelodeon definitely would step up if maybe in terms of comedy shows, cartoon comedy shows, Nickelodeon definitely would do it in a few years.
Yeah, but at that point, not just yet.
No, not just yet. We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. Let's move over from 94 to 95, and there were 2 after-school programs that featured around that time. You to You and Nick in the Afternoon with Stick Stigley.
Well, the one that definitely is the most remembered of those 2 is Nick in the Afternoon with Stick Stigley.
Yeah, You to You, and nobody really talks about You to You as much. It was the first one that was featured in the afternoon. This was like at the point in 94, 95 in which the internet was starting to become a big thing back then. They were receiving emails from kids, you had fax machines, and basically you had people talking, like you have the kids going live on camera and discussing about, things that they were going through, like regular after-school curriculum and activities. The hosts of the show were Ali Rivera and Satron Starks. And basically, most people don't even remember this show at all.
What's funny is they would then trade in 3 hosts for a stick.
Yeah, they trade in 2 or 3 hosts that were human and that were teenagers for a popsicle stick with googly eyes, and the one with the googly eyes is the most revered out of all of them.
Well, you have to look at it in another sense, as they saved a boatload of money.
Well, not only that, but also it actually had a continuing storyline in some segments. Like, for example, Stick Stickly would go around and interview Nickelodeon celebrities that were popular at the time, and he would have his own continuing storyline that involved with him having a lost twin brother, and he would also answer kids' mail, and not to mention that Nick in the Afternoon with Stick Stickly also had one of the most memorable ways of telling what the address is to mail him. P.O. Box 963, New York, New York, 10108.
Indeed, and Stick Stickly was definitely one of the first cartoon or not real sort of hosts for a network of cartoons to really do this sort of thing, interviews, and to bring you and host you and take you into cartoons or whatever programming would be on his block. And later they would go back to some actors, but in some cases they would carry this over, like Nick Jr. would then get the everybody knows him as Face.
Yes.
And Cartoon Network would then get Tom from Toonami.
Yes.
So really, Stick Stickly paved the way for both of those characters, both of those cartoon hosts. And, it's nice to see, and just to think how it all started with a stick.
Yeah, that's right. It all started with a stick.
Makes you wonder where they got that idea, They had all these actors, not actors, hosts for the first one, and you just think, hey, what would be better than 3 hosts, a stick?
It's genius. It's genius indeed.
It was genius. Might not have seemed completely genius at first, but that's how ideas start. Mm-hmm. And Stick Stickly still remember to this day.
Yep. Now, when discussing about 95, there was one thing that Nickelodeon created during that time period that started broadening out towards what they were back then. Now, almost around 10 years prior to that year, Nickelodeon was at the point of being bankrupt. But now they were making all this money, and they decided to create their own movie studio, Nickelodeon Movies. And the first movie that came out in 95 was Harriet the Spy.
Harriet the Spy was definitely a movie I remember from my childhood, and it was definitely one of the Nickelodeon's, I think, more remembered movies that they made. More of the self-made Nickelodeon movies, it didn't really come off of any of their Nicktoons, which many would later.
Right. Harriet the Spy was based off of a book that came out in 1967.
Yeah, I believe, I did remember it was based off a book. I think they would do that. Did they do a series of Unfortunate Events?
Yes, they did do a series of Unfortunate Events, but that's not until the 2000s.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that it wouldn't be the last time that they would adapt from a book either. So.
Yeah, it wouldn't. But this was the first.
Yeah, the first ever Nickelodeon movie. And I believe that they started out pretty well with their movies. It was definitely a good start for them in terms of, can we make a movie? Do we have the power to do this? And I believe that they proved to everybody that they could make decent enough movies. And we even, did Harriet the Spy, was that on Nick? It didn't appear in theaters, did it?
It did, actually.
Oh, well, there you go, too. That they could go on to the big screen like Disney could, because Disney by this time, way before Nickelodeon, they could just spit out a movie and boom, it's on the big screen, it gets millions and millions of dollars, and Nickelodeon basically said, if we wanted to, we could get a movie on the big screen too.
Well, yes, the movie did do well financially, and it was critically praised. However, when I looked back on it and I did a review of Harriet the Spy,